In 1945, Japan was finished. Its cities had turned to ash. Its factories were ruins. Its empire had been erased from the map. Hiroshima and Nagasaki were radioactive wounds on the land. Tokyo was a scaffold of steel and silence. Food was scarce. Inflation was out of control. Morale no longer existed. For the first time in centuries, Japan had no army, no real power, and no identity beyond defeat. It had lost not only a war, but also the illusion of invincibility. And yet, within a single generation, that same country would rise to dominate global trade. Its cars would be more durable than American ones. Its electronics would be superior to European products. Its companies would become symbols of precision, discipline, and design. The world would call this an economic miracle, but Japan's recovery was not a miracle. It was an economic revolution, carefully constructed by people who grasped a truth that very few nations ever truly understand. Wealth is not rebuilt through luck. It is rebuilt through discipline. To understand Japan's rise, one must first look at its fall. The Japan that surrendered in 1945 was a shattered economy with no functioning industry. More than 40% of its cities had been destroyed. Half of its merchant fleet was gone. Industrial output had fallen to less than 1/10 of pre-war levels. Millions were homeless. Thousands were starving. And Japan's currency, the yen, had been virtually destroyed by hyperinflation. When General Douglas MacArthur and the Allied occupation forces arrived, the goal was not to rebuild Japan. The goal was to neutralize it. The plan was to dismantle Japan's war machine both militarily and economically. The old industrial giants known as the Zaibatsu, such as Mitsubishi, Mitsui, and Sumitomo, were targeted. Their power was broken, their influence eliminated. Land reform followed. Large estates were seized from landowners and redistributed to millions of tenant farmers. It was one of the most radical redistributions of wealth in modern history. But then, the world changed. The Cold War began. The Soviet Union was expanding across Asia. Mao's revolution had turned China communist. Suddenly, a weak Japan was no longer justice, it was a risk. Washington realized something critical. The strongest defense against communism was not bombs, it was prosperity. And so, the American occupation changed course. Japan would be rebuilt, not as a military empire, but as a capitalist fortress in Asia. The foundation of Japan's economic rise was laid not in factories, but in philosophy. Instead of the chaos of free markets, a system was built that economists would later call a guided economy. The state would not directly manage production, but it would determine its direction. At the center of this system stood a new institution, the Ministry of International Trade and Industry, MITI. MITI became the invisible architect of Japan's future. The bureaucrats there were not politicians. They were engineers, economists, and planners who believed capitalism was something to be managed, not worshipped. They studied which sectors could make Japan globally competitive and directed resources there. Steel, shipbuilding, automobiles, electronics. The state protected these sectors through tariffs, subsidies, and tightly controlled credit via the Bank of Japan. Every yen had a purpose. But Japan's true strength was its ability to combine Western technology with Eastern discipline. While America chased consumption and speculation, Japan focused on structure and restraint. Companies were reorganized into networks known as keiretsu firms, linked through shared ownership and long-term cooperation. At the center of each keiretsu stood a bank, providing financing and coordinating strategy. These were not competitors in the Western sense. They were industrial families, Mitsubishi, Sumitomo, Toyota. On the factory floor, another revolution was taking place, not technological, but cultural. Lifetime employment, seniority-based pay, collective loyalty. Workers didn't just work at a company, they belonged to it. In return, companies treated them not as disposable labor, but as long-term assets. This stability allowed a powerful concept to emerge. Kaizen, continuous improvement. Every process could be refined, every defect reduced, every second saved. This obsession with perfection pushed Japanese manufacturing to a level the world admired. In the 1,960 seconds, exports exploded. Steel, electronics, and automobiles flooded global markets. Quality was unquestionable. Prices were unbeatable. In 1968, Japan surpassed West Germany to become the world's second-largest economy. In just 20 years, it had moved from starvation to abundance, from ashes to automation. This was not driven by oil or gold. It was driven by coordination. The state guided, banks financed, companies produced, workers perfected. The entire country moved like a single machine. But beneath this miracle was control, quiet, constant control. Meiji decided who could import, who could export, and who could borrow. Large corporations were favored. Small ones survived on the margins. The model worked because the goal was not equality, it was national survival. In the 1,950 seconds, the Korean War accelerated this system. The American military needed supplies. Japanese factories delivered. Billions of dollars in American military orders revived heavy industry almost overnight. This time, Japan was exporting capitalism, not conquest. Throughout the 1,950 seconds and 60 seconds, growth was staggering. GDP doubled every 7 years. Wages rose. Education expanded. A middle class emerged. The Shinkansen bullet train, launched in time for the 1964 Tokyo Olympics, sent a clear message to the world. Japan was no longer a defeated nation. It was the future. Culturally, Japan chose a different path from the West. While the West celebrated individual wealth, Japan elevated collective success. While harmony was sacred, profit was not a trophy. It was a responsibility. Companies reinvested. Banks thought long-term. Workers accepted lower pay in exchange for stability. This was not socialism, nor was it pure capitalism. It was a hybrid system designed to strengthen the nation. By the late 1970 seconds, Japan looked unstoppable. Its steel surpassed America's. Its cars lasted longer. Sony, Panasonic, and Toshiba redefined global electronics. In 1985, Japan accounted for 15% of global GDP. But every success has a cost. The coordination that built wealth also built complacency. Easy credit displaced discipline. Speculation overtook production. By the late 1980 seconds, Japan was inside a massive bubble. Stock prices soared. Real estate values reached absurd levels. Banks lent recklessly, convinced prices would never fall. Then they did. In 1989, the Bank of Japan raised interest rates. The bubble burst. Stocks collapsed. Property values plunged. Trillions of dollars in paper wealth vanished. The miracle turned into a warning. The 1990 seconds became Japan's lost decade. Growth stalled. Deflation set in. Confidence eroded. The very system that had lifted Japan now trapped it. But calling this a failure misses the point. Japan did not collapse. It stabilized. Inequality remained low. Infrastructure stayed world-class. Society did not fracture. The miracle did not disappear. It matured. Japan's story is a warning for every economy chasing growth at any cost. The tools that once saved it, low interest rates, easy credit, coordination, now look familiar around the world. Japan reminds us what happens when discipline turns into dependence. There is also a human lesson. Japan rebuilt itself step by step, worker by worker, decision by decision. Its rise proved that prosperity can be engineered. Its stagnation showed that even success must evolve. The Japanese economic miracle was never just about factories or exports. It was about philosophy. And every philosophy has its limits. History does not repeat itself, but patterns do. Japan remains one of the clearest mirrors of what can be achieved when discipline replaces ideology, and of what is put at risk when success hardens into habit. If this gave you a new perspective, subscribe. History has the answers.